No, never mind.
Yeah,
Never mind.
we're just going up live and getting the recording started here. And it takes a second for us to pop up onto the live stream with YouTube. They are not super fast. We should get a notification any second now. Thanks for your patience, ladies.
No worries. My dogs are very feisty today, so I hope that they'll behave. I tried crating them and they were having none of it. They were just back there in the bedroom barking because they know, they have like the sense of, oh, it's Monday and it's time for us to do the live stream. We're not staying back here in the bedroom.
Not going to be well behaved.
I had to bring them back out. So
dachshunds can tell when your attention is elsewhere, and they will come running and they will start demanding it, and they will be very loud and very annoying until you cave and pick them up and cuddle them like a little baby.
Yeah, they're both sitting on my lap right now.
Are you a dog person, Sally?
I'm just waiting for my cat to come.
I like cats too.
No, I like dogs very much, but it'd be impractical to have one. I had one in college. I went to a school where everybody brought their dog to class, so it was fun.
Oh, wow. That sounds like heaven.
Yeah, it was Cornell, so they have, because they have an ag school there, everyone brings animals are just everywhere, which is
chickens.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, I guess a person could bring a chicken to class.
A support chicken, emotional support chicken.
I'm the emotional. Realize I'm the emotional support for my cat.
Yeah, I am too for my dogs. One in particular.
One of our chickens is always trying to come in our house. She comes in while we're eating dinner. If we've got the screen, she can walk through the little hanging screen. So she shows up and wants some of our food. We're definitely her emotional supports too. Well, welcome to Solid Ground Live, everybody. It's Monday, September 2nd, and we are joined today by Sally Satel, who is a psychiatrist and a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and the author of a number of wonderful pieces on how social justice is impacting therapy and mental health, social justice ideology, I should say, because it's not, as we know, really social justice. And most recently, Sally, you wrote this article for the Free Press about the Zionist blacklist. And I read this and it was such a wonderful piece, and it really illustrates a way in which very tangibly these identity politics are impacting people's careers and livelihoods, as well as their personal lives. And so I'm so pleased that you joined us today. I'm so excited to speak with you and hear more about these issues as you see them. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you so much.
So can you first, for anybody who hasn't read the article we're talking about, could you lay that out for us just a little bit? So
sure.
And I'll link the article underneath of the video description for anybody who wants to follow up.
Yeah. So this saga seems to have started in late March when in Chicago, well, let me back up. It involves listservs, and as most people, well, everyone in the mental health world knows, but in case others don't, that is a big mechanism for referrals. So people will be on a listserv, therapists, clinicians, and someone will say, you know, I have a patient who's moving to Chicago, and been working with her for years. Her problem is anxiety. She has this kind of insurance. She's looking for a female therapist, or a therapist who's you know, under 50, something like that. So people do specify what they're looking for, what they feel comfortable with. So with that background, this was a listserv, and on the listserv, a therapist wrote, I have a patient who's looking for a therapist who is a Zionist because she's interested, here's the exact phrase, a patient dealing with feelings about the current geopolitical climate. So a number of clinicians posted and said, oh, you know, I think I'd be good for her, and I have time, and I take that insurance, and so-and-so. And it turned out that someone, because an individual therapist might be on several of these lists, and that's totally fine, of course. So a woman who was the head of something called the Chicago Anti-Racist Therapist List must have also been on that first list. Its name I don't know, and started collecting the names of the therapists who had responded and saying, you know, I could treat her, implying they themselves were Zionists. And so she took those names. There were 26, and apparently she took some others, it's alleged, just because they, quote, sounded Jewish, and compiled a list of these 26 names that people, to warn people not to refer to them. I'll quote her. This is a woman who's, I'll tell you, I could say the name because it's now public record, and she's also impossible to find. So I don't think anyone could ever dox this lady. But her name was Heba Ibrahim Jawad. I don't know what nationality, but sounds Arabic. And she said, "Hi all, I've put together a list of therapists and practices with Zionist affiliations that we should avoid referring clients to. Please feel free to contribute additional names, as I'm certain there are more out there." So, of course, that's an outrage on many levels. And very quickly, some Jewish therapists who were on, I believe they were became aware of what she had posted on the Chicago Anti-Racist Therapist List, and immediately called the Anti-Defamation League of the Midwest, and also an entity called the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation that basically oversees licensure. And so those bodies got on the case. And in fact, there was a hearing last week for this woman, because there likely will be penalties imposed. At one end, she actually could lose her license, or it could be suspended, or she could pay a fine, or some combination of things. But it was continued to the end of October, so it's not clear what kind of repercussions there will be. You know, certainly feels on several levels, one, interference with the commerce of other clinicians at the very least. And of course, in terms of kind of the outrageous violation of professionalism and, you know, of course, the discrimination involved, and the larger issue of, my gosh, what therapy is about, and how the identity and affiliations of a clinician do or do not impact the kind of therapy they do. And so that's basically the story. It was dismaying that a lot of the response to her posting of this blacklist was a lot of, you know, heart emojis and "you go girl," and "I'm glad you made this list because it's something I wanted to do." So it's really worrisome. I honestly not sure if this is I mean, it seems like it's a tip. I don't know if it's a tip of the iceberg or the, you know, tail end of a bell curve in terms of a trend, but there certainly is. I've read a number of commentary by Jewish therapists who are assumed to be Zionist, and these days they probably are. You could have a whole debate over what the definition of Zionism is, but in any case, what they say they have felt for years, frankly, a real chilling attitude towards them by other therapists. The idea being, of course, as Jews, you know, here we go again with this facile but powerful template of, if you're a Jew, then you're, you know, part of the oppressor class. I mean, this is just so reductionist. It's almost comical, except that it seems to have sway.
Yeah, someone in the chat, Georgina Whitby, says it's kind of fair enough to seek a therapist with a particular view to discuss a particular contentious topic. And so I guess that question is there, like, when we're making a blacklist of people based on these are how these people are likely to identify with a particular topic, And then we also have people who are shopping for therapists based on connection to a particular identity or topic. It just raises all kinds of questions about what we're doing with therapy and
Right.
what is it for at that point.
No, that's a good question. And to be honest, there's been some speculation, no one can prove this, that that initial request for a therapist was actually kind of a lure. Kind of,
Oh, I could see that. Yeah.
because it always sounded, frankly, it sounded a little off to me. Because as you say, Leslie, if you want therapy, go to a synagogue and talk to some folks, or go to some class, do some reading, and find someone online who could, possibly talk to you for a little while and educate you more. If you really want to understand what's going on, you don't need a therapist. Now, it's true that said wanted to discuss her, feelings about it. Well, I don't see why it matters that someone is a Zionist. I guess to be fair, if this is a legitimate request, and it may well be, this reflects this alleged patient's concern that she would encounter a therapist who was hostile to the Jewish side of the debate, of the conflict. But in either way, the therapist is not there to discuss geopolitics with her. It's there to help her understand and manage her emotional reaction to what's going on. I'm hoping she asked for a Zionist therapist only to protect herself from someone who was not going to be sympathetic, as opposed to engaging in some sort of substantive political conversation.
I think I mean it's interesting that there's speculation that it might have been a sort of plant, and that is very interesting. Actually, wouldn't surprise me. But I've noticed, having watched this all unfold sort of on turbocharge since October 7th, I follow a few sort of turfy Jewish women who have become, they were already fighting this unpopular cause because they're all like young, liberal, left-wing, progressive. Some of them are gay themselves, and they were already kind of speaking out again, going against the tide on the especially transing kids and men and women's prisons issues. And then after October 7th, even women who had liberal, progressive women in their circles who were kind of coming around to their point of view on the trans issue, then it all broke apart again with the surprising to me fervent, virulent Palestinian support for Hamas, and a lack of empathy for what Jews were experiencing in the aftermath of witnessing that. And I can imagine, like, this one woman was posting a lot about how, and she was like sharing messages and stuff with her former bestie, who essentially broke up with her, not had stood with her through all of these other political hot button issues, and then on that one was like, actually, no, you're a Zionist imperialist excuser of genocide. That's the sort of thing that would definitely drive someone to therapy. How do you deal with that heartbreak? Because essentially it's a relationship that's ending. And it's just yet another example of how this toxic political environment, ideological environment, it's not a political environment, it's ideological, is really, really destroying relationships, which is exactly why you would seek out a therapist, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, I think I'm not sure if you've had Andrew Harts on have you had Andrew yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think we've had him on solid ground, but I've had him on the channel quite a bit.
Yeah, on the channel. Yeah.
Well, you all know who he is. Yeah, that's one of his many motivations for starting the Open Therapy Institute, is for people who are disaffected in all ways by the radical social justice movement, and how all the disturbing sequela of being rejected, excluded, attacked. And so, yes, it's extremely depressing. I was once running a treatment unit, and I won't go into a lot of detail except to say that even though I was the leader of this inpatient psychiatry unit, it was a short-lived sort of coup where all the staff were kind of aligned against me, and it ended up being resolved. But during that phase, it was absolutely devastating. Just, you know, it was a sense of being the ostracization and being treated so unfairly and not being understood. It was devastating. So I can imagine, you know, especially if you're a younger person and that's your world, that's basically your social world or your professional world. I could definitely see it driving someone into therapy.
Yep, 100%. I mean, that's part of why Solid Ground exists, is to help people that have had those experiences. And just even if something hasn't, you know, if somebody hasn't lost relationships over it and they haven't had, you know, been canceled at work or something, living with the anxiety of, I'm in an environment in which all of a sudden people seem to have become sort of zealots and angry villagers with pitchforks looking for anybody who disagrees with the prevalent ideology or even has a question about it, is quite frightening, because people know, my gosh, it's only by virtue of the fact that they don't know what's in my mind that I can still work here. Because if people knew, they would come after me and try to smear me and distort what I believe and what I'm saying. And it's really an awful way to live.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the anticipatory anxiety is terrible. And yeah, you're walking on eggshells, and
Yeah,
it's really unhealthy.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think a population that potentially could be growing. I just was listening to Gender Wider Lens yesterday, and there was a person who had been an active activist on every dimension, even encouraged your wife to maybe become trans. And then it broke with the Israel issue because she's Jewish. And she looked around, and all of her fellow people she'd been out on the streets with about everything were suddenly in this different place on this topic. And so someone like that, like, her identity, everything, you can imagine how much therapeutic stuff they would need to unpack to feel like their whole purpose of being a social justice warrior and this and that. And then these people are suddenly hating them and rejecting them. Yeah, so there are a lot of potential clients for this type of stuff.
There's this concept called, you probably have heard of it, called shattered assumptions. And there was a book called that. Ronnie Janoff Bowman, I think it's from the 90s, or it's quite old. And basically, she was arguing that she was talking about, you know, shattered assumptions, so pretty self-explanatory, but a real disorienting kind of realization about oneself or the world, really, is a major cause of post-traumatic stress disorder. And everyone can debate that. But I've personally always thought that that's what drives a lot of, I used to work at a VA, but that plus maybe disability, the desire to get some disability money, excuse my cynicism, but
your cynicism is welcome here.
Drives a lot of at least what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, there's the classic autonomic response to fear, you know, the hypervigilance and the startle and some intrusive memories, that kind of thing. I mean, there's a physiological component, and then there's the psychological component to post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's often I would say the shattered assumption variety. It often takes the form of a sense of betrayal, like of a leader that you thought you could trust the person running your platoon. You even thought you could trust your country, that this is a just purpose to be risking your life and even killing other people. It's often behind, I think, like moral injury, where people feel that they've been almost trapped in a position where they had to violate their own values and moral code. So it's very dislocating. And it seems like October 7th was a version of George Floyd. It just allowed so much to come to the surface, and so much, frankly, social pathology that I guess it's good we know about. But if that wasn't a reorienting major slap in the face after October 7th, which was to see how many people were truly skeptical at least and hostile at worst towards Jews, was just stunning.
You know, it's
Yeah.
interesting when you're talking about shattered assumptions. One of the things that I was thinking about is how a lot of these preferences or discriminatory markers or these identity things, they're like badges of allegiance that people wear or that people declare, but they don't really indicate that the person is working on XYZ. It's just an indicator of a person's mental orientation towards XYZ. So anti-racism, or, you know, where you stand on Israel versus Palestine, you know, these kind of things become badges of your orientation, and other people select you based on your badge of orientation. And it comes back to what you're talking about shattered assumptions. It's like, who can I go to who's going to align with my pieces that I'm holding of this shattered assumption? Who is going to stop trying to shatter more of my assumptions? And I guess I'm just sort of playing with this metaphor because it's really interesting how we are, so how we select, like the question, can I get a Zionist therapist? That does seem weird, right? That does, when you say like, that sounds like a lure, because what I hear more often is from people that reach out to me, or people that I speak to about this issue. It's more like, how do I avoid a woke therapist? They don't want to get a non-woke therapist. They don't care about what that means. They just want to avoid a woke therapist. So I could imagine somebody being like, how do I get a therapist who's not going to push these views on me, but not, how do I get somebody who's going to reflect the thing that I'm wanting to look at?
Right. I think
know.
I think there's a difference. I think people are aware that therapists are being trained now to bring an ideology into the therapy session, and that therapy is, you know, according to this new way of thinking, isn't just, you know, two people, or, you know, a therapist with a family sitting in a room talking about their specific issues. The therapist's job is to attempt to change society, you know, through this person, through indoctrinating this person. And people are becoming aware of that. And so they're trying to, when they say they want a non-woke therapist, what they're saying is, I want traditional therapy. I don't want to be indoctrinated. And I don't want therapy to be used as a vehicle for, you know, trying to sort of control my mind and shape my views.
Yeah, I think the original comment that you read, Leslie, about saying it's sort of fair enough.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with that, and maybe the word Zionist is a weird choice or whatever, but um, it's sort of imperative that if you just go to sort of bare your soul and try and sort through your own thinking, that the person who you've chosen to help you with that shares at least the common basic worldview. And it's unfortunate if that hinges upon geopolitical events in the Middle East. However, that is our reality. I wouldn't begrudge someone asking that, because fundamentally you cannot have an honest and vulnerable conversation with someone who is in the grips of a toxic ideology. It's impossible, whether or not they have a couple of letters after their name that gives them the imprimatur of objectivity or expertise. It doesn't. It just shows you that they are a threat to your mental health, because they are going to put the ideology above all other things. But I mean, it's funny. Yeah, you cannot go see a therapist who is going to try and bring you on a journey through identity politics and why you should assume guilt and assume responsibility for things that are not within your personal life. I mean, everything about CRT and everything about woke ideology is in direct opposition to even my basic understanding of good mental health practice. It's all projection, it's all catastrophizing, it's all histrionics, it's guilt. I mean, every single thing about it is the opposite of how you become mentally
Mirror
stable.
image, exactly, and
Yeah, it's a mirror image. Yeah.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
External locus of control. You've got very little control over your lives. The powers that be are controlling everything. Whoever holds the power is controlling things. Which group are you, the oppressor or the victim? And then also, I think it's very codependent because it's asking people to take responsibility for actions that they haven't committed or thoughts that they don't have, which is, we know how unhealthy and destructive codependent thinking can become.
Yes.
Do you have a sense, I think it was you, Jennifer, who said that somehow the public, has a sense how corrupt therapy can be. I don't know, has anyone ever seen any polls? I would love to know how far into public consciousness this has penetrated.
I would guess, I don't know if it has, because I just think of how many normie people I know who don't really even know how upsetting a lot of these things are. So I think go ahead.
I'm sorry, Deborah.
No, please.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, do you think that's because basically people like us are not going to end up with these 2-bit therapists? I mean, we have more savvy about who we're going to see. And we get referrals from friends who've, oh, I'm seeing this guy, he's really great. You should, if you're looking for therapy, you should consider him. I just think that one of the reasons why the elite, so to speak, they really just don't know about this very much is they're not likely to encounter these. They're certainly not like, they certainly don't know what's going on in training, unless they're reading Leslie Elliott, and they are not going to counter these people because my sense, and I could be wrong here. I mean, when I think of sort of therapists, forgive me here, it says I'm biased. I'm a psychiatrist I was just working from psychiatrists. So psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, counselors, and then you have the generic therapist designation, which can intersect with all of those, although less so with psychiatrists these days. And it's my impression, could be wrong, but this is more of a problem at the counselor level. But is that right? Or is it really bad at the social work and the psychology level? I just don't.
Oh yeah, it's really bad. It's bad. It's bad across the board. It's bad across the board. It's bad in the social. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. It's bad in that. It's bad for LPCs, licensed professional counselors. I don't know how it is for MFTs, marriage and family therapists. I'm not sure about that, but the American Psychological Association has put out quite a few sort of woke statements and mandates. So no, I think it's everywhere. And I think I do still think that the average person, like most people, don't really understand how therapy has become politicized. But I think the people who are concerned overall about the spread of woke ideology in society are aware of it. And some people who are concerned about their kids going through, difficult stages and maybe questioning their identity. Some of them are keyed into the fact that multiple states have rules demanding that the therapist immediately affirm the child's purported gender identity. And so quite a few parents are concerned about that.
But specifically, yes, I don't know, just make sure we're talking about the same thing. It's clear that the public statements these professional organizations put out is horrifying to me, just confusing their complete mission, which is what Leslie referred to at the beginning, thinking their mission is social justice and not clinical, not therapeutic efforts. But so that I'm very much aware of, but I was referring to actually what goes on behind closed doors. Do we have a sense of sort of where it's
the school that I went to trains both LMHC and MFT. So I would have said that, at least in my own personal experience, it would be the same social justice, applied sociology influence going into this therapy training. And one of the stories that I hear often from people, and I if anybody out there is listening and wants to tell a story of your own, because the place where I hear this is in confidential discussions with my coaching clients, I have heard the same story over and over of the therapist trans my kid. The therapist, my kid, I didn't know what to do. My kid was lonely and sad and asking for someone to talk to and withdrawn and in their room all the time and just seeming really unhappy. And it was after COVID and there was so much isolation. So I took my kid to see a therapist, and the therapist suggested that it was gender, and then coached my kid through writing this letter to me and declaring they're trans. And then the therapist, one person recently told me the therapist prevented the family from discontinuing therapy because the child was over 13, and in that state that was a mature minor, so the child had to be the one to discontinue therapy even though the parent was paying the bill. So these stories, I can't, let me think, I've heard this story now from at least 5 different clients of mine, and I that's a small pool to draw 5 people from, So if anybody wants to talk about this, I'd really love to talk about, but these people are generally leftist in orientation, liberal. We're talking normal, mainstream, not somebody who was far left or far right, or whatever that means anyway. But we're talking about your just normal average people who thought the best thing to do was, oh, I'm in a pinch, my kid is suffering, therapy. They just have this automatic assumption, like, this is a resource I can seek. And so I think that a lot of people aren't aware of a problem until they've had a personal experience with it. So,
and I think to build on that, there's just, I think people with kids in general are more aware of all what's going on in the society, right? Because it's either intersecting at school, or if they're trying to get mental health. I see the people that don't have kids, don't go to regular workplaces either, who are, work by themselves, work at home, seem to be the least aware of what's going on because they just don't have somebody immediately making contact with that world.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're lucky. I hate to see therapists, the mental health field lose public trust. I think that's just tragic, because I think we hold a really important space of, you're struggling in life, you can go and talk to a person who's objective and careful and mindful about what you're going through and all the different factors, and is, interacting with you in a very conscientious, deliberate manner without a secret agenda that has nothing to do with your own mental health and well-being. I feel really, sad to see and angry to see that happen to the profession. And I think the best thing that therapists can do is just resist that pressure from our organizations or from the trainings that we go to that tell us to politicize therapy, and to keep holding true to what therapy really is.
Sally, I want to be mindful of your time, and I know you don't have the full hour to spend with us. Are you okay to keep going a little, or should we? Okay. Jen, okay, Jenny, go ahead, because I have a big thought about what Jen said, and I'll come back to it.
No, because the thing I was about to say was take it in a direction.
So one of the things that I'm wondering is, we're talking about how people are like identifying a blacklist of warning, these people think a certain way, or other people are requesting, I want to talk to someone who thinks this way or who doesn't think this way. And you're expressing this sadness about the public trust, losing public trust for this particular field. One of the things I've kind of wondered is, have we placed too much false trust in this kind of field in the first place? And are people, is this sort of is this the edifice crumbling a bit, realizing that people actually are, this is another way of categorizing people. They have those letters after their name that indicate that they're a mental health person. So that's a category of person. But the actual categories of internal values and morals and social tribal values and things like that supersede those letters. And so are we kind of seeing a crumbling of an edifice that was false to begin with? Because there's, what is a therapist? And I know I'm not trying to be argumentative. It's interesting to me to think about this. What is a therapist really doing but taking a role that would have been socially performed since the beginning of time and commodifying it. And so when we do that, we create almost a priest class of people who are these saintly, objective, like value laden people, enlightened. And when you run them through a 2-year or 3-year mill, like the one I went through, and then send them out with a badge that says now they're the saint that you can come talk to, there seems to be something really false about that in the first place. So have we bloated a profession, and are we seeing the necessary dissolution of that? And I don't know. What do y'all think? Am I being too
Great
strong
question.
right here?
I think that ultimately what is more important than credentials is the individual and what they bring to the table. But I do think, at least back in the day, I do feel that the training that I received was good training and was 100% essential to me. Having the background knowledge and performing my role well. But somebody said, I can't remember who it was, but somebody wrote in a book that therapists are sort of have taken the place in modern life, have taken the place of the, kindly priest or minister that you would go to with your problems. And I do think in some sense there is religion became a bit secularized, and people were going for wisdom and a listening ear to therapists. So I do think there is a little bit of that role, but I think that's all the more reason why we should take what we do very seriously and realize it's a very privileged position for people to be entrusting their deepest emotions to us.
And their children.
Yes, and their children, and that we really need to have our heads screwed on straight. And if we are a political activist therapist, and that's what we think therapy is, we should tell people that that's what we're doing. That is not what I think a therapist should be doing. But since there's a whole bunch of people being released out of these schools on the unsuspecting public, I think that they should say what they are, and the rest of us should identify ourselves as traditional therapists. That's one way to get around this, because we are not going to, at least for the time being, we're not going to change what these schools are dishing out.
Like a CSA or like a SJA, social justice activist, after the LMFT.
Yeah. And let people know that's part of the treatment, is raising your awareness of these, issues that might be impacting you. And the rest of us can continue to do therapy the way we've been doing it.
Which is important and needed. And you were right, Jennifer, when you were talking a little while ago about how it's this very valuable service that good therapists provide. And it's incredibly important to many people's lives. But to answer your question, Leslie, I mean, I say this speaking from Ireland and the UK, where, the Irish are famously immune to psychotherapy. Isn't that what they said? Americans have too much therapy. Like, I think that's pretty much, I mean, maybe adults, whatever. But I mean, Abigail Shrier just wrote an entire book about this and how badly the profession, and I'm not speaking of anyone on this call, obviously, but in general, writ large, the profession has really hurt American children and young people. And I mean, because what happened was the American, and this is, you can't really blame the therapist for this. This is the families that are seeking this. We somehow absorbed this nonsense idea that the locus of authority and wisdom was no longer in the parent. It had to be outsourced to a credentialed expert who had gone through some kind of school or some kind of training, which, again, extremely important, Jennifer, like what you were saying, and like a really good idea to, can you designate, your school of training as the old fashioned one or the newfangled one, the ideological one. But either way, like this, there was over reliance on not just therapists, but medical doctors and, professors and all this stuff, instead of understanding that we inside ourselves as adults have the wisdom and the knowledge, even if we didn't go to college, shock horror, to raise our own damn kids and create functional human beings. I mean, that idea has disappeared from the American professional managerial class, like almost entirely. And, to quite a lot of damage. I mean, I say this as someone who's gone to therapy many times myself. But I would never consider, so I shouldn't say this, I would never, ever consider sending my son to one. I just wouldn't. I mean, because he's just a kid. Sorry, I feel like I'm saying too much now, but no, I mean, I think that, families lack resilience in certain, especially in parts of Blue America. They don't feel like they can manage their own problems.
That's really interesting perspective.
I feel like
I like that.
I don't need to sound critical to you guys at all.
Oh no, I'm not taking it that way. I think there's some truth in it overall. I mean, we outsource everything though, right? Now, the richer we've gotten, the more we outsource. I mean, what about the rise of doggy daycare centers, for heaven's sakes? We never would have thought of that, a few decades ago.
Exactly.
Well,
Sally, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I guess I'll finish on this. Now what you said, I do think just impressionistically that a lot of people under the umbrella of therapists, even before this, we've become so acutely aware of the intrusion of the way social justice has distorted what we're doing, probably weren't even doing therapy. I think some of them were just almost being a kind of I'm talking about outsourced friend, but for some, if they did it in a wise way, it probably was constructive, because so many people, especially I've noticed, I work with patients who are I work in a methadone clinic, so I don't do therapy in any conventional way, but people, I've got to say, just the lower classes, I've noticed that obviously there's a different emphasis on self-disclosure. A lot of people aren't particularly psychologically minded. Also, there's a big problem with confidentiality. People often don't respect that. So it's very hard to confide in people, because who are you going to trust? And a therapist, even if it's a therapist friend, can provide that for a little while. But I always thought the essence, I mean, there are a million angles to take on what therapy does, but I think one of the most important things it does for people who are not, severely mentally ill, of course, is to show people how they sabotage themselves. And I don't think priests ever did this. So, a priest or the clergy certainly lost their position as advisors. But I also think that because probably they were pushed out by therapists, but I also think they didn't do as good a job as a good therapist could do. And
yeah.
And that's one of the things that therapy can do if it's done well. It's how one sabotages oneself, not how the culture does. But on the other hand, not to gaslight people. I mean, you have to acknowledge that, yes, you're in an environment. I mean, I see my folks, some of them live in public housing, and honestly, I don't know how they don't shoot them up half the time. I mean, they're violent. Here's just one example of a patient who's the lock was broken on his door because someone tried to kick it in. And until the housing authority got around to fixing it, it was quite a while. So people just walked in his apartment. I mean, who could not lose their, frankly, mind over such a thing? So you can't, you can't be a classic Freudian and see everything as internal processes. It's also really damaging. And I could see why a patient would feel almost betrayed if a therapist kept reverting to that kind of lens. But but my final point is, people are always going to grasp at whoever sets themselves up as someone who can solve their problems. And we see this for Andrew Tate, because people want a savior and people want to be exonerated. And that's up there. That should be on Maslow's hierarchy, and gonna try to find it wherever they can. And then there's gonna be a lot of, I'm just blocking out the word I just had in my mind, cognitive dissonance, because, forgiving your therapist a lot at first, until you finally realize, I don't think this person is helping me. But anyway, so those are my views.
Can I just ask a quick question or make a quick point about that? I would love, Sally, to hear more about what your kind of getting at there is like the class differences in terms of need and crisis. Like that to me is, I would love to hear more about that sometime when you have time.
Well, the bottom line is that, the people I work with in the methadone clinic, some of them say, maybe I should be in therapy. And I think, not yet. Because
Right.
we have so many practical things to work out. And frankly, if you're still in a fragile state, meaning that if you're still kind of using drugs, because it's a methadone clinic, so everyone will use fewer drugs when they're in a methadone clinic. But don't kid yourself. Most people still, or a lot of them, I should say, continue to still use other drugs and even opioids sometimes.
For sure.
So it's not, until you have really gotten to the point where you don't turn to drugs to manage your emotions, you're really not ready for any kind of depth therapy, and I don't even know how many folks would be particularly good at it. I think they see therapists as someone who's going to give them a medication that's going to work. Almost never does. Although since we throw around Seroquel so much, which is an antipsychotic, it's also a very sedating antipsychotic. It shouldn't be given out to people, I believe, who are not psychotic. It does help calm some folks down. But I guess I'm rambling here a little bit. But another thing you can get from a therapist is a diagnosis. And that's a way that, again, I bring up the disability. I'm sorry to sound so cynical, but our disability system is so broken. And I think disability, if you wrote, unless you are truly disabled, in which case, thank God it's there, is just the greatest way to get yourself out of the workforce. When jobs, when work is the best therapy, there is a lot of people, especially people who are unemployed, as opposed to someone who just doesn't like their job and wants one that's more fulfilling, and please go for it. But, if you're trying to deal with an addiction, the worst thing you can do is be bored all day. And so you need that structure in your life. You need the social networks that you can get in a job. And we just, end up hampering people in a well-meaning way. Everyone's well-meaning, let's stipulate that. But, I think disability, the threshold for disability would be so high. But then again, as I continue on my soapbox, we don't have really good vocational or apprentice kinds of programs that we'd need. So even if you fix one thing, it's a whole network of deficiencies here. It's really frustrating. And the final thing I was just going to say the final thing I would say that why people want diagnoses, because it's sometimes a key to getting services. And I'm sympathetic to that, actually. If that's the only way you can get them, I get it. But it's also, I'm just stunned at the misdiagnosis that goes on. If every other person walks in, I'm bipolar, and you say, obviously, they don't know, and someone told them that, and you have to say, well, why did the psychiatrist say that? What were you? What kind of experiences were you having? What kind of symptoms were you having that would make him or her say that was your problem? And either they don't know, or they say, well, I have mood swings. And I say, well, I have mood swings. And it's not their fault. It's not. I just worry so much about the quality of clinical work out there. Anyway, sorry, that was just a whole throwing my spaghetti at the wall in terms of my disgruntled, the problems I see. But I'll end with the good news, all that in with respect to going back here a full circle to the therapists. There were a lot of, there was a lot of action online with a lot of hostility between the clinicians, some saying that they were basically, maybe they didn't like a blacklist, but, after all, people who are Zionists can't possibly privilege, and they can't possibly understand patients. It's just awful. But then a lot of people said wonderful things, like, last time I checked, we provide a healthcare service, not a political science seminar. Another person said, I've sat across from many clients who fundamentally have different viewpoints in life than myself, and provided care with compassion and grace. which
There you go.
it was a lot more than that. So
There
I'll
you
work on
go.
that, encouraging.
That's what it's about. I like to hear that.
Well,
Well,
thank
Sally,
you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you joined us. And I think that even though we kind of got into some tangents that were around diagnostic quality and around other aspects of care and class, I think that those are so important to highlight because, as you said, you can manipulate one thing, but it's such a network, it's such a system of issues. So it's really, really hard. I mean, we can highlight this, but there's also so much that it touches and that's connected to the system. So
Again, thank you so much. Keep up the great work.
thank you,
Thank
Sally, for joining
you.
us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. So Sally only had a brief time for us today. She actually gave us more time than we thought we were going to get, and it was really delightful to have her on. And I have linked in the chat the article that we were talking about. I will also link it underneath of the video description for you guys to follow later if you'd like to read that. She's written a number of really good pieces that I encourage everybody to check out. And one thing, we were talking about the locus of authority not being in the family. I kind of wanted to jump back into that because I thought that you were all making some really good points there. There's an over-reliance on medical, mental health, social, educational authority and experts that seems to start very early in, I don't know, I would say the American family, but sounds like it's kind of the Western culture right now, the Western cultural tradition. I know in some European countries, doesn't every child go to childcare by the time they're like 3 years old in some of these countries? Like this, very standard. And I think that this is really, it's the combination of the individual responsibility plus the societal, like the self-sabotage, right? She was talking about self-sabotage versus the reality of someone's circumstances actually being pretty oppressive and difficult. And so in this state, you've got the people who are ceding too much of their own authority, but also those people are ensconced in a societal landscape that encourages and almost forces them to think that they have to do that.
Could you say that latter? Oh, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, just on that point of the kind of competing, all the network of factors that cause people to be unhappy and to be, live disordered lives. There's I think he's called Darren Grant. No, Johann something. I'll get his name and I'll put it in the comments. He wrote a whole book about depression and how it's really environmentally driven in many, many cases. Specifically, with growing up around, in poor communities, and you're given prescription drugs really, really early on, and it's very hard to not live under immense stress, and your environment is physically ugly. It's stressful in terms of higher levels of violence in your neighborhood and your schools, and there's all these competing factors that work directly against you ever having any peace, like literally peace in your life. But I see that as a slightly different thing to the upper middle class parents who from conception on are constantly seeking outside validation for all of their choices in their family life. But you know what, Leslie, maybe you're right. I think, and I think Sally was sort of saying like how she doesn't blame these clients of hers, and maybe I shouldn't blame these well-off families because they're just doing what society is directing them to do. But that it comes at a cost, and I think that cost needs to be reevaluated now.
I would say that it's maybe even more intense for families that aren't well off. Like my own experience as a young mom, I was a single mom after my girls were 4 and 6 when I got divorced, and I had the state insurance for a while. And that is like you hand that card over and it's a badge that tells people to treat you like crap. And I know that from both sides because I worked in medical care. I worked in primary care for 11 years. And that is how people are viewed on the inside too. They're identified by what their insurance is. So in here, it's like they're an Apple Health patient. So that's like the Washington poor people's insurance. The people in the office do see you as different. They do see you as lesser. And when you are on the other side of that and you're the one receiving treatment, you are treated as lesser. You feel it, you experience it. And there's a greater degree of expertise an authority that's exercised over you by the people who talk down to you, condescend to you. And I would say that I think a lot of that reliance on experts that parents experience right now is fostered by the medical process. That your child visits, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year. That's just the first spate of checkups, well baby visits. And they get, there's different procedures that are done at every one of them, almost always a shot or more shots, but other checks and weights and stuff. And if you are a Medicaid patient, then you can get in trouble for not going to those appointments.
Wow, really?
Yes, you experience pressure from your insurance company as well as your doctor's office to attend all of those visits. So it can be quite scary to feel like, and I've worked in a doctor's office where I saw a family reported to CPS just for not following a doctor's order about some trivial aspect of childcare, trivial aspect of baby care. So I think that it's quite scary for a lot of families, and they really do experience a lack of a sense of hypoagency and an external locus of control when it comes to their parenting choices. And often, if you talk to a lot of women, and I don't know what y'all's experiences and friend and family members' experiences you've seen, but a lot of women experience this first during pregnancy, when their pregnancy is hijacked and taken over by the medical providers who are telling them how and what, and scaring the bejesus out of them the entire time. If they don't do it right, their baby's going to die or it's going to be really bad. So this medicalization often starts even prior to the baby being born. And so to me, it's a tragedy, and it is very understandable that when your 12-year-old, your 11-year-old, your 14-year-old starts to have problems, you automatically reach to an outside expert to help you fix the problem. I think it's wrong. I think there shouldn't be a system that preys on that and accepts your money for it. That therapists who work with kids, unless there's extreme circumstances in that family, should always work with the kid within the context of their family setting, within the family system.
The parent involvement is really important, especially at that age.
What you're talking about is a tyranny of experts. That's horrifying.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And I don't know if it's a matter, I'm just sitting here like, what starts it, and I think more and more people got college degrees, more and more people. And then there's a complexification, like we're learning new things. We have more research, and so there's this sense of that it's kind of complicated, that there's more to know. And, let's look amongst my peers. We all know stuff. We should go to people who know stuff. I don't know. I feel like it might have been an innocent thing at first, but with just the proliferation of that. And then this idea, like even when I was in business and doing consulting, there's like, we learned how to be an MBA and those people don't know how to run their company because they didn't learn this stuff or something. And so I think a lot of it is just that there's been more higher education.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. No, I totally agree with that, Deborah. I really do. I really, really do. I think it is an unintended consequence. And for each individual who's gone into college, myself included, and gone out into the world thinking I'd achieve something, that like there's validity to that. But on the macro level, what it's done is very unsettling at best.
I think this is such an interesting topic. I don't think that we have a guest lined up for next week. So if it appeals to you guys to continue this kind of discussion next week, I kind of think that there's some hypocrisy around the role for therapists anyway. Are they experts or are they peers? Like somebody in the chat said that they were always told that the therapist is not there to give you advice on how to live your life. And that's right. But also when they are set up and when they are taught in this very they have the diagnostic authority and they can offer treatments and they offer this opportunity to frame what's going on for you. There is a conflict there. There's definitely some authority being exercised. And then the parent, the hypoagency, the cult of expertism. I love the phrase tyranny of experts, Jenny. So maybe if you guys want to talk about it some more next week.
Yeah, there was a lot of other stuff I wanted to talk about the original story, which we didn't get to, which is fine. But I mean, I just really quick, I knew someone here who had her children taken from her by child services, and I mean, she definitely had some messy life problems, and but the story was horrifying and tragic, and she's no longer alive, and
Oh God. So
just
sad.
the thought, like to me, maybe she's like it activates all of my mother bear instincts, like the thought that because of your own imperfections, which let's face it, we all have them, the state can come and remove your children from you. I just find that just upsetting. So
Yes. Well, I think that'd be great to maybe visit this in more depth next week. And I really enjoyed having Sally on. Thanks to
Yeah.
Sally. I will include some links to her work underneath this video after I have a chance to wrap it up and do that. Thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat. We didn't even introduce Solid Ground today.
I know,
We
I
just
realized
got
that
off and
later, and it was like
ran.
we were already kind of going, and I'm like, it's okay. Join Solid
Yeah.
Ground,
Join Solid Ground.
solidgroundsupport.com.
Yeah, solidgroundsupport.com. And we're thinking about launching some new offerings. So if you're in Solid Ground, you want to talk to us about that. Right? One of the things that I would love is to start a group for new members only who've only been with us for a short time. But, hit us up. We have a great group over there. Come and join us and have chats. And thank you, ladies, so much for this lovely Labor Day live stream.
yes.
I look forward to seeing y'all next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.